So we talked about this a bit yesterday. Anyone who was here as part of the opening, we were talking about the Filecoin storage and retrieval lifecycle. This is an updated version of a graph that some of you might have seen like a year and a half ago, talking about storage clients coming in, working with many different storage on-ramps that are customizing and creating front ends and product experiences that adapt to specific customer verticals and needs. Those work with storage providers. Oftentimes, those are the on-ramps that are also your retrieval ramps as well. The storage on-ramp is also negotiating and making sure that there's a good retrievability of data back to retrieval clients that might be the same as the storage clients, might be different from the storage clients. And they also work with things like, IP&I from an indexing perspective and our diagnostic tools to make sure that the data they stored with SPs, that those SPs are holding up their end of the bargain. And that data might also then be available to IPFS gateways. But as you can see in this map, storage on-ramps are a key part of the Filecoin network, of the storage and retrieval lifecycle within Filecoin. They're part of Filecoin. And one of the challenges in how we've been adapting our language is that sometimes we've been using the shorthand of yada yada on-ramp stores on Filecoin and using the language where Filecoin can mean many things to people. And I totally understand how this has crept in. Even I've noticed I do it every now and then, where some people think of, okay, well, Filecoin started out as just a chain with storage providers and a baseline protocol. Like in the early days when Filecoin was first being developed, it didn't even have a markets node. It was just, being the little heartbeat of a network. That was the first test net. It didn't do anything special. You couldn't make storage deals with the first testnet of Filecoin till Hannah wrote the first version of the markets, and that was only it took a lot of work to get that market to actually make functional storage deals for a while. And so a shorthand we've fallen into sometimes as a network is talking about, on-ramp stores data on Filecoin, where Filecoin is something other than the on-ramp that you are using. And that creates a couple of challenges in different ways. This is if I can get it to shift. Okay, cool. This is how we want to be talking about Filecoin. Filecoin is both the L1 chain and it's the layer 2s and applications that are extending and customizing the services within that layer 1 chain for specific verticals and product users. dStore, Singularity, Akave, Storacha, Basin, Triton, the applications that they have developed that are storing their data. I can maybe make this bigger.
Why are there still question marks?
That's just like which vertical are you targeting? It's like, does this go there or does it go there? Does that go there or there? I think there's a...
I saw that there was like an updated picture that was sent around during the map session, I believe. Something?
I don't know.
Paul put that together for a topic of discussion, and we were asking people where do you define on here. Let's check on silver. He put you here, you put yourself there.
Mm-hmm.
Should it be somewhere else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some people were like, we don't even go there because we're a network. It's like, well, what's a network versus an L2, et cetera. So that was for discussion purposes.
Yeah, and I think this is trying to be inclusive, like Lighthouse, for example, application, not an L2 right now. Storacha in the early days, planning to be a smart contract, not yet an L2. And so these things exist on some amount of a spectrum, but what we clearly want to represent and use our language to describe is that these are part of Filecoin, extending the capability and the customization of Filecoin tooling to meet user needs. It might do additional things than the L1 chain. The L1 chain is harder to change, it's, slower moving, but these are still part of the Filecoin network. They receive Filecoin Retro PGF. They get support from Filecoin public goods teams. We work together on customizing new functionality and capabilities at layer 1 or in the tooling ecosystem in order to support and onboard these different users. But at any point where we have layer 2s or applications that fork away from the Filecoin network, that becomes something that is outside and other to the Filecoin community, not something that we would want to support. We are working on this mission and initiative together. And so some of the examples, zoomed in too much, that Juan was describing yesterday as part of the keynote, And the concept here, on-ramps are part of Filecoin. These are systems that are built by the Filecoin people here to bring Filecoin into these markets. They're often capitalized with resources and people and funding from the network. And this is, a similar concept to optimism. Optimism was created within the Ethereum ecosystem. It is part of Ethereum. It's extending the capabilities of Ethereum L1. It writes to L1, but it's still part of Ethereum. Similarly, the language we want to use within here, Sriracha, Akave, Basin, part of Filecoin. They write to the L1, they extend the L1 and customize and make changes within their L2s or their applications. But they are not separate from Filecoin, the way that Optimism is not separate and other from Ethereum. They've worked really hard to make sure that that is clear to the wider community and ecosystem. And we don't use language Optimism writes to Ethereum, because Optimism is part of Ethereum. So it writes to Ethereum L1. It checkpoints to L1, but it is part of Ethereum. And so all of the application data and transactions and other things you're doing as part of Optimism are part of Ethereum. And that's, I think, important language for us to use as well, so that we are defining this line here at the client level, where clients can interface with Akave and have the trust and experience of, I am using Filecoin, because you are using Filecoin when you're using Akave, instead of something here, I am using Akave, and Akave uses Filecoin. That would be this language here, where I myself as a client may or may not be I'm not a user of Filecoin in this language. I'm a user of dStore, and then maybe dStore is a user of Filecoin. And that's not the language that we are going for in this network. That creates a much more fragmented, much lower trust, much less collaboration within the ecosystem. And so when we're doing our diagramming and when we're using our language, we really want to make sure we're communicating this first message. I wanted to stop there before I go into the little discussion-y exercise part. Does that align to people, or are there things that are challenges or frictions for us using and updating our collective terminology to demonstrate this alignment in our language?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to. Yeah.
I think it's good to have a list of bullets, or like you just said, optimism rights. So we can say Akave writes to the L1. I heard the word anchors as well sometimes, because you're submitting a proof, or you're using smart contracts, and you're saying the smart contracts are basically running on FEVM. So if we could state that and we're all consistent, that's easy for us to do. And I think it helps us too, because it's not maliciously, as you know, it's more, like you said, you fall into a certain pattern and you stick with that pattern, right? So I think just having that outlined somewhere. Now, the other thing is we will find ourselves in a position where we bridge to other networks. How do we want to handle that? Because I think that's a very good way for us to, like all the L2s, if we can bring in builders from other ecosystems by adopting some of their platforms, we should think about how do we do that. I think the language still applies, right? Akave writes to Filecoin. Like we were also thinking writes to.
Yeah, what you just said is wrong.
Oh, see, I get it. So I cannot say from writes to Filecoin. Writes to the L1. Okay, this is hard for me. So the way I would change it, what makes sense in my mind is like Akave and a Filecoin L2. It's like very short. There's no debate. When they ask me what does it do? We manage data on Filecoin. That's a way to say it. We manage data on Filecoin.
What are all good things?
Right?
Manages data on Filecoin. Heck yes.
So
That's a good exercise. Akave writes to Filecoin.
I didn't know.
Let's also do the
Yeah.
good one, which is Akave stores data rights to Filecoin.
okay,
If you're in L2 writing to L1, but you're clarifying that we're writing to the L1 chain, but you're still part of Filecoin, and you're moving data around within Filecoin of the multiple different services within that.
I have
So-
a question of that, like just as like a subset. So we're always in these examples talking about Akave does this, right? But let's say in marketing, we're always doing like calls to action, right? We're always like, okay, like for example, on your homepage, what are you going to do? Like start storing on Akave, or are we saying start storing on Filecoin?
So we did a lot of
Which
research around it, which I was gonna,
you could say both.
but enterprise is terrified of Filecoin because it says coin, which is crypto. And so it's actually like a negative keyword, and we can't say it in our social. Ads get turned off, we get penalized, and we had to start a brand new paid search account
do
because we said we're considered crypto.
Right.
So we have an issue with saying, because we were talking earlier, we do have Filecoin once you get into the how. But we have a really hard problem with enterprise saying at first Filecoin. So how do we get around that? That is true to the network, but is also true to how search works and search engines penalize.
I think the routes around that are either via, sorry, my phone, otherwise won't be recorded, are either via education and doesn't, again, these things aren't necessarily your top headline. You might be attracting people depending on your entry point with various different language that appeals to them. But then as you are onboarding and they are using Filecoin, we need to educate them about that. And we can't bury it so far under the hood that people get all the way through the system and it's completely passed them by that they're even using Filecoin or engaging with it. So there's a sweet spot there where maybe we're putting out our SEO front end and feelers with lots of different customized language that can attract different groups. And then we are educating that as they get into the, great, I'm trying my drag and drop or I'm connecting with the storage provider. At that point, it's like, this service is powered by Filecoin. And maybe, do we say that's loud?
I mean, I love the word bridge, but.
I mean, how do you want to use the word bridge? Akave can bridge to many different networks. And, Filecoin itself bridges to many different networks. And it's great. And we've literally spent hundreds of engineering hours making those bridges better. All of the work with F3 is to make it easier to interoperate and store across different networks with Filecoin. And it's great that Layer 2s are also going to do that as well. It's great that applications building in FVM on Filecoin are going to be doing that as well. The gap would be if you're like, we use Filecoin and Optimism and something, like that's not conveying that this is part of Filecoin, which is interfacing and orchestrating and bridging and coordinating with all those other networks, right? That language would be confusing to someone who would then think, okay, there's Akave, and then there's all these other networks that are all somehow separate from Akave. Yeah?
This is, this is very valuable. And with a group of marketers in the room, it's good to hear this from you, from the source. Two questions. One is, we were talking about this on an earlier session. If we say rights to the Filecoin L1, that is early adopter language, but it does not resonate with general audiences. So I think, do you see a world where you have different messages or different ways to talk? I think this gets to what Jen was saying too. Different ways to talk to different audiences. I think if Jen puts on her D-Store site, D-Store, rights to Filecoin, that would work.
Because
Like that
I
one.
don't write a damn thing.
Right. I just,
I'm not a storage provider, so.
I think we just have to figure
Connects
out.
you with Filecoin services.
Yes, something like that could work. I just think you have to be careful when you get too technical. Yeah. And the other thing, a bigger picture question. So sometimes when we're thinking about whether messaging is right, our shorthand on our team is can you replace the word Filecoin with the word internet? And does it make sense, right? And so some of the ways that this is phrased doesn't feel like as federated or decentralized as I would think we would want. I use Akave to store on the internet. Like, I don't know, it feels like we're like creating like a big behemoth, like a big tech behemoth, rather than this decentralized group of tools and technologies.
I mean, Filecoin is a decentralized network. Just the internet is actually a very decentralized network.
Yeah.
So if you use the internet and you know, that parallel, we're describing something that is decentralized, but that is a network and an ecosystem that has, you know, boundaries at some point. They're slightly fuzzy boundaries and things come in and out of them often. But, you know, there is this community and this ecosystem and all of the resources and time and energy and support we put into working together as a community. That's why everyone's here at this event. And when you have things that are sucking value out of those ecosystems, we need to be able to use different language in those contexts of like, well, they might sometimes interface with Filecoin, but they are not part of Filecoin. Whereas things like Akave, Storacha, you know, et cetera, are included within the Filecoin offering, the Filecoin community, and are highly integrated. And as a client, you can work with them the way that, you know, as your entry point to Filecoin. Akave is my entry point to Filecoin. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'll just go really quickly. I have a question on some specific language, which is a lot of times we say such and such application is built on top of Filecoin, or Akave is an L2 built on top of Filecoin. Are those no? Okay.
My whole website is wrong. Yeah.
I think my messaging is wrong too.
For like 102 pages. It would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I say that all the time on top of Filecoin. I say that too. Yeah.
So if I was to say, being selfish here, but storage providers.
Is the top the problem? Can you say built on Filecoin?
Yeah.
Or is that also still wrong?
See, that's what I was asking too. I wondered that too.
If you're built on Filecoin,
Yeah, that's
Right.
strong.
Right.
You're on
Okay.
Filecoin. I don't know. You're online. You are the line. I don't know. This terminology is weird. We should find a form that's probably better than I am. But yeah, from my vantage point, if you're on Filecoin, it's difficult for someone to come to you and be like, "Great, you are Filecoin. I am using you to." Thank you. Sorry. Like I am using you to store data on Filecoin. You are Filecoin. You're on L1. Like you're an application on L1. And that, like, again, I don't want us to differentiate too much and over-focus on just the L2s. We should also be talking about like applications and services and all of these other on-ramps that, like, you know, a lot of these are not L2s. And they also need to be using language that is like, I am a Filecoin on-ramp. I store data on Filecoin L1 or with Filecoin storage providers. I'm part of Filecoin.
What about
Fleek
gateway?
is maybe the kind of interesting case where it's like, I think actually Fleek stores data with Web3.storage, which then stores data with storage providers. So I don't know if I'd quite say Fleek is actually a...
L3? No. I mean,
Are they an L3?
An L3.
Okay,
Yeah.
we need more layers in our graph. Just keep going.
Yeah, I have a few more if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I mean, right.
What? A few more what?
But I have a few more that I want to add, like the concept of a bridge. Like we say, like we bridge Web 2 to Web 3. And I know this is,
That's fine.
yeah, I just want to make sure that's okay. 2 is the gateway concept.
Where's my orthogonal?
Because we're adding stuff, right? The gateway. So I do think the gateway is a good terminology to like highlight like what you're doing. Like we're a gateway to Filecoin or we're a gateway to decentralized storage. Are you okay with that? Because it does resonate. It seems to resonate as like, what are you actually doing? Because if you look at Akave, we actually have different layers too. We have an SDK, and on top of that, we've built an S3 gateway.
I think this works. Would everyone agree? I'm your gateway to, because like, you know, same with the IPFS gateway. The IPFS gateway is part of IPFS. It's like a key building block and tool. So yeah, I think that's fine. Like Akave is your gateway to Filecoin.
People think they're on IPFS. They're like, we're running BitSoft. They're like, but you're not on IPFS unless.
Yeah. If anything, the IPFS gateway has a centralizing challenge where people think the gateway. We actually had someone who did a security incident at some point where they're like, we can take down all of IPFS, and it was like an attack against like 1 out of 35 gateways. You're like, that's cool. Like, good. Thank you for finding this bug. Not quite the level of severity you thought it was, but still useful.
I was just going to say back to Olivia's like thing. It's really like intuitive to be like, okay, layers and you're building on top of, right? And I think that that's where we all have kind of been in that mode or that mindset. And I can see why this is coming up now, but it's kind of, I mean, I just try to think of it, or now I'm starting to, as of a few days ago. If you think about a apartment that's built on top of a grocery store or something like that, then it's not really a part of it. Whereas if you're building an apartment on top of another, building, and then it's all part of that building. I'm just trying to like now think of it as like layers.
We used the same language yesterday, actually, when we were talking about this somewhere else. I swear to God, it was like during drinks. But I know I love this because we're both like coming. Yeah, we are in the Gaysorn Urban Tower right now, like from the penthouse all the way to the basement. Yeah. All of it's part of the urban tower.
And if you're saying,
but like we're in one co-working space, and then there's like a shop down there. We're all part of the Gaysorn Urban Tower. We're all part of Filecoin, but we're running many different businesses, each of which have their own like success cases, and they sometimes work with each other. And we have some network services like the janitorial staff that might be helping keep all of these spaces clean, et cetera, et cetera. But like, I think that's a very good model of like, cool, Filecoin's the building. We all have different businesses operating out of that building. Do we want to gut check other language? Hannah, are there challenges you've run into from the Sriracha side from a communications perspective?
There's a couple. So there's a couple of things. One is, there's the language, even if you desire to adopt the language, we are Filecoin or something of that kind of, there's a bunch of things that like other peripheral language that is like, that like you're running an uphill battle against because of just history. Like, so for example, like we're starting to, get nodes onto our network. Are they storage providers if they're not running POREP, right? They are, but most people aren't going to think POREP when they, people can participate in consensus when they hear storage providers. So there's a lot of just uphill battles around language and conception. And then the other part is obvious. And then there's also in order for all this to work, there's also an ask for folks working on the core Filecoin protocol and chain, which is to treat sometimes people will say, oh, you guys are offering like a service, a front end to Filecoin. It's very like front end programmers aren't real programmers kind of vibe to it, and I'm like, no, we're building a ton of technology here. Like, guys, can we not? So I would encourage that's a problem that could be addressed. And then there's also there's the very concrete business thing of like, Sriracha, Akave, D-Store. I don't know who else was on. I didn't see the list, so I apologize if I'm leaving someone out. Like everyone is building a business and a brand that they need to be a brand. So there is you can't just completely put yourself in the background. You've got to, and this is always a built-in tension that was going to emerge from, people being independent companies, with independent business interests. Obviously we can try to, all play cooperatively, but like there's a reality there, so those would be my thoughts.
I love that. And I totally agree. Like, if the Starbucks downstairs wasn't able to like be, I'm Starbucks and you should come have coffee at Starbucks. And this is why egg bites are like lifeblood and we should all eat egg bites every day, which I strongly agree with. Like that would be a problem for their business and they absolutely should be able to do that. But we need to do it as a network in a synergistic way with the overall building and growing traffic and adoption and users who are coming and getting value out of this building and the businesses within it. So I definitely agree on the brand side. Let's answer some of these questions because I think it's a really good one. And I added it to the question side because I didn't have an immediate nudge. My general perspective, like let's workshop it together. okay, I'm a service provider. I'm going to start providing PDP as a service.
Yes.
I'm proving that on Filecoin L1, and I'm holding files in that PDP deal. Am I considered a Filecoin SP? I'd vote yes. As long as you're proving some service on Filecoin L1 at some point, you're a Filecoin storage provider.
I would generally agree. I think you will, but they're not participating in the consensus, which is
Yeah, you're not participating.
on the crypto world. That's very much, very important. Maybe not. So you're not a PDP only SP is not participating in consensus, at least for now, and probably for a while. And then they're also, and then the other part is that it's a big language change, right? Like that's the thing is like, yes, they might be a Filecoin SP if we say so, but like then we have to convince other people to do it. So yeah, I don't know if we want to say so though. That's maybe the first decision.
I think they should be, and I think we have talked about those in the past that way, where storage providers should be just the act of providing storage in various ways, and whether or not you participate in consensus is a separate process. Right now, those processes are linked, and the word storage provider has been used to define that, but I don't think it should be the only way.
If someday, not very far away, we have retrieval providers and other things on the Filecoin network. We have Spark retrieval success rate, we have Spark TTFB, we have maybe compute nodes. Are we going to still call them Filecoin storage providers? Is that, if they're providing one of those services and maybe not some of the other ones?
Well, storage provider is like the specific process that provides storage for pay. And so whether that process is coupled together with a compute provider and a retrieval provider into like a larger process that you want to describe a different way.
So if you do a POREP, a POST, or a PDP, you're then you're a Filecoin storage provider. If you're not doing those and you're providing a C1 or C2 compute process, you're a Filecoin compute provider, or what we call sometimes a Filecoin ceiling as a service provider, not a storage provider directly, because a storage provider might work with a ceiling as a service provider to handle their compute work and not do the storage work. So we're going to have many more types of nodes in the Filecoin network than we've had in the past, and that's maybe a good thing. Did we have other questions, other challenges people have run into? Let's use this time to get on the same page. We have decided, yes, your PDP providers to Strata, Filecoin storage providers. What about the use case of, let's say that you have someone who's only providing a service to an L2 and they're not engaging. They're a data prep node for a Kave or something like that. Yeah, or a validator on an L2.
Another question. I was called in to join this. How long do you have, and what are you trying to get out of this?
Mostly we were trying to get versions of aligned language and versions of misaligned language that we don't want to use, and get the different groups who are using this language on the same page so we can go and update our comms and update how we're speaking.
How much time do you have? How much time do you want to spend?
We're over time.
30 minutes over time.
Yeah, so the comment I was going to make is you're approaching a small conversation between the way that you have a lot of people in the room. I think you should use the people in the room a different way, which is to put them in a document writing together about this. And I think you're going to get way more output faster. And so if you only have 10 minutes.
Actually, they moved the other track that was supposed to be in here to Oak 1. So Phil Plus is going to be in L1 or Oak 1. So no one is here after us. So we can go, I guess, as long as we want.
I have another talk in
Yeah, we all have all this stuff going on. So Molly, my prompt is think about how much time you have and how you want to use the number of people in the room and tune the format to make get the most use out of people. Because otherwise you're going to just enable a few people to talk at a time, and I don't think you're going to get very far.
Okay. I'm very happy to open this up and get people to type more into this document. I can also copy this into a Google Doc. Google Doc is slightly better for real-time collaboration, and we can add more aligned language, competitive language, and open questions of I don't know what to do with this one. Is this one acceptable? Can crowdsource it. and then we can put your name next to them, and then we can follow up and answer some of these questions, and we'll share it back in the recap so that people are, this is one of the things we've aligned on. Here's a list of good things. Here's a list of bad things. Does that solve the problem?
Sure.
But I do appreciate the conversation and the open discussion, having the people in the room. I think that's important to explain. So thank you.
Yeah, I think you could do it like retro style, where like you discuss it and then everyone writes for a bit and then you discuss it together.
Yeah, I think we have discussed it for a while, and we've worked through some examples at this point. And so at this point, I think it's an opportunity for folks to add more to this as they think of them, or open questions that have not been resolved yet. Sorry. Thanks, Clara.
I put it in there in case. Okay, thank you.
Since we moved the Fill Plus one, people might be trying to come into the room.
Mm-hmm.
You may want to put a sign out there or ask somebody to sign out there. Directly.
Okay, great. Can we edit this? Door right now. Yes.
So this question came up earlier in the PMF track. There was a discussion on what constitutes a network, because we have a lot of Filecoin L2s that are launching tokens. I don't know, I'm going to put Daniel on the spotlight to discuss why he thinks a Aave is a network or not.
Well, we did speak about this earlier, but yeah, we had SPs that were just single storage providers. They're managing their own nodes versus a network that manages multiple companies with multiple nodes. Yeah, I mean, we also call ourselves a Filecoin L2.
Sorry, I have one opinion on this because this came up with someone giving us the feedback to not call ourselves a network. It's a little late. Our domain is sriracha.network. But the one thing I would say is like the word network, it might have a meaning in crypto. It's also a very old computer word. And like, I don't think we should be trying to limit who gets to call themselves a network. That's just going to confuse people. Yeah.
I think, because I've heard this as well, there is a perception, and one of the things that, making sure that we're getting clear about how we're talking about this, it's important. Some people hear, oh, that's a network that's separate from Filecoin. And so we need to be careful that when we talk about Sriracha, Aave, et cetera, as networks, that they are networks that are part of the Filecoin network. And that those are not separate systems, but they are like, intersecting Venn diagrams that are mostly unioned, I think, because we're talking about these are part of Filecoin. So, the network here, the application, the service, et cetera. And some people, just especially when this translates into other languages, might get more of a perception as like, that's over there and Filecoin's over here. And so we need to subvert that mistaken assumption.
That makes sense. I get that. And there's I understand the fear. What I have also gotten is like a meme through back channels multiple times from, I just hear people saying, Sriracha is going to try to replace Filecoin. It's like this very like, almost like, like conspiracy, as I'm like, we're not going to rewrite POREP. We're not going to like launch an L1. Like none of these things are within our ability to do. And so like, just chill out. Like we're not going to do that. We're not trying to replace also like, and because Filecoin has core technology that we need and we are not going to write because it would take years to rewrite it all. So I just throw that out there, but you would be surprised. I've gotten more than a few people where I'm like, wow, there were 6 conversations that happened before I even got this message where there was a lot of confused ideas going around. So
yeah. And they're like, to be not these groups in the room, but there are some groups that start out being like, buddy, we plan to work with, and then they're like, and we are no longer working with Filecoin. We now work with Storj, or we now have our own network, or something. And, they draw that clear line in the sand of like, we are other as a network. It's like, okay, cool. If you're other as a network, we're not going to give you space, time, support, etc., because we're focusing on making this network very successful. And there's a lot of teams that are pushing that forward that we want to invest in and support. And so, like, cool. If you're going to build an application and you initially talk the talk of being part of Filecoin and then don't follow it through, then the network also needs to have defense mechanisms whereby we're like, cool, no more. Like, we're not gonna send clients or provide event space or other things to teams that are not part of Filecoin.
I think to jump back to the analogy about the building, right? There's, like you said, there's Starbucks in here. There's no one who would say that Starbucks isn't a network of stores, right? And this complex is part of a network of buildings. The networks are different things. They're both networks, but they're interoperable in that respect. There's pieces of one inside another, there's pieces outside another. It doesn't limit one to use the word for the other either, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, networks of networks are super common. We have it all over IPFS as well.
There's an element of like, oh wow, there went like a good full day of my time reaching out, following up with conversations where it's like, we were not planning anything nefarious. Like, we want to use and it's like, it's a lot of trust building, and that actually, to the extent there can't be a baseline trust, that slows things down and is not a good feature for a network to have that kind of level of, what are they trying to do, kind of thing. Yeah.
And it kind of speaks to what we're doing here, because I feel like that clear language of like, hey, you guys are, kind of in this aligned language versus the competitive language will really help those types of like swirling conversations. So I mean, this practice here, I think hopefully we can extend into further, async work, or maybe a part 2 of this conversation to like really hone in. I know certainly it's going to help FF. I think it will help everyone though, kind of understand, whoa, like this is kind of inside this network box or outside this network box. It will certainly help me. And this extends differently into events, as Molly was just kind of like alluding to. So like, I do feel like this is a very valuable time for us.
I can't type, but.
So how would you talk about something like IONET, which is working with Filecoin and others? And are they not in the building?
They're not in the building, but they work with the building. And maybe they work with the building. I actually don't know. There's an idea that they want to do a partnership with the building, with maybe some shared marketing, and maybe they'll build a building next door and we'll create a walkway between the two, and it'll be hunky-dory. There'll be lots of shared foot traffic to those buildings, and we'll be a like consortium of buildings, partner universities. I don't know. But like, at least as of right now, IONET is not part of Filecoin, right?
Right.
They're not actively storing data. They're not actively interoperating. We could, I think in some cases, acquire new businesses that then become part of Filecoin over time. I think that's possible. But at least from my vantage point, like there's a deep, like, this is my entry point to Filecoin. And they would have to either be working extremely closely with the L1 or providing a set of services within Filecoin and conveying that as if you are getting those services from Filecoin, this Filecoin, in order to be included. That's my perspective.
I think there's qualitatively something different between a service that is providing something substantially different from storage. So for example, CDN is primarily a storage-related product, right? The product that you're really doing is storage in a specific location so that it can be served very quickly. Like you're serving, the product is delivery, but it's delivery of data into a specific location. And so that's, I think, fair game within the storage sense. That's a CDN is primarily a storage-related network. A compute network is qualitatively kind of different. And so you have to consider how to enable that, because I think a lot of compute networks will feel qualitatively part of Filecoin in a different way than I think the storage L2s, right? And so I think there should be a way of enabling them to feel very Filecoin aligned, because there'll be several compute networks that emerge from the Filecoin network. We already have 3 or 4. They're very small and they're not very successful yet, but we have 3 or 4. And there's a lot more that aren't. And so I think you want to create an environment where it is easy for compute networks to gain a lot of value by becoming part of Filecoin. But I think the language is qualitatively different than the way that I would describe it for storage ones.
Yeah. So, like, for example, what language would we use for Fluence right now? Like, Fluence is a Filecoin L2 or has a Filecoin L2. There is at least an aim of deeper interop. There's a lot of engagement in shared principles with like IPLD data and doing compute over that. I think my vantage point would, I think there is a pathway for Fluence to become part of Filecoin, but I wouldn't consider them part of Filecoin today. Do you think that's accurate, Juan? Okay.
They didn't get that much value out of it over the last year. And so they got pushed into another point.
Yeah.
So part of this conversation that is really about the positive sum nature of being part of Filecoin, which I think this is not about a marketing question, it's more about economics. Sorry, like the game theory. I don't just mean finance, I just mean like what is the utility that you're getting out of the network? I think that's an important conversation to have, but I think it's a different one. So can you clarify how much time this is going to go for? Because
I think
here instead of other somewhere else.
Yeah, I think we should wrap imminently because I also need to go to do other stuff.
As the last question, can you synthesize the value of Filecoin L2s for Filecoin? Like, what are the benefits we should focus on?
Yeah, so the value of all of, well, at least the L2s that we're talking about in this conversation is it's customizing L1 chain capabilities and chain performance and features that are offered by L1 for different markets and creating an ease of use and a customer product and experience that is much easier to engage with as different client groups, and they're solving a usually more narrow customer fit problem, utilizing all of the L1 capabilities, often adding some new capabilities on top that help make it better tuned for that market or that user group. And so that extends the capability of Filecoin. It extends the fit Filecoin has to different customer needs. And that, vice versa, attracts many customers and helps ensure that they onboard successfully and are very disappointed if Filecoin ever went away because they are making Filecoin very useful to all of those clients and users. So the way that we would measure the success of all of these applications as well is how much data do they bring to Filecoin? Are they incentive aligned between their layer 2 business and network, which should be profitable and valuable, and the layer 1 business and network that should also be profitable and valuable. And so these should be incentive aligned with each other and collectively create a lot of value for Filecoin overall. Yeah? Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for participating in this. Appreciate you.